Welcome back to Anatomy and Physiology. This next section, we're going to be having a look at the cardiovascular system. The cardiovascular system consists of the blood in the body, the blood vessels that carry the blood around the body, and the heart, which pumps the blood throughout the body. So blood is composed of white blood cells, red blood cells, platelets, and plasma. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see a test tube with a few different components and percentages there. What this is a blood sample that has been extracted from a person. It's gone through a centrifuge where the different components of blood have actually separated apart. And this gives us a good idea of how significant each component of our blood is. So plasma is the most significant because it makes up 55% of our total blood volume. Red blood cells make up 45% of our total blood volume, and white blood cells and platelets only make up less than 1% of our total blood volume. White blood cells fight infectious agents in our body, and there are numerous different types of white blood cells. Only a small percentage of them are floating in the bloodstream. The rest of them are migrating through the tissues, and the majority are actually found in the lymphatic system, which with white blood cells makes up our immune system. Red blood cells are the smallest cell in the human body, and they have a very vital function. They're responsible for carrying oxygen from our respiratory system all the way down to our tissues to be used by our cells, and they also transport quite a large percentage of carbon dioxide back to the respiratory system to be exhaled out. Platelets are tiny cell fragments which are essential for forming blood clots. So they're constantly flowing through our bloodstream, and in their unactivated form, they're very smooth and don't cause any disruption in blood flow. But if a blood vessel has been injured and somebody is bleeding, platelets then become activated through clotting factors released in the bloodstream. And when these platelets become activated, they grow sticky-like finger processes, which help platelets to stick to other platelets and red blood cells in the blood vessels to form blood clots and stop hemorrhage. Plasma is the fluid in which all of these blood cells are suspended and transported around the body. Plasma is also essential for transporting nutrients, hormones, and waste products. Plasma is comprised of 90% of water and a few other dissolved proteins and hormones. All of these components of blood are transported around the body through different blood vessels. So there are three major types of blood vessels. We have arteries, which comprise of very large arteries leaving the heart to the very small arterioles right down in the tissues, and they're responsible for carrying oxygenated blood from the heart to the tissues. We have veins, which are responsible for carrying deoxygenated blood back up to the heart, and they do this through aid of one-way valves in those vessels. And then we have very, very small blood vessels which connect our arteries to our veins, and they're called capillaries. Now, capillaries are the only site in the bloodstream or blood vessels where gaseous exchange can occur, and they can do this because they're only one cell layer thick. So gases can move very easily from the red blood cells through the plasma into the tissues and back again, and this is the site of gaseous exchange. So here's an anatomical diagram of our arteries, capillaries, and veins. On the left-hand side, we'll have a look at the artery first. So the inner lining of any blood vessel is called the lumen, and all blood vessels are lined with epithelial cells, but once they're inside, they're called endothelial cells. So these are very, very small cells that are all connected together to create a nice, smooth flowing surface through our blood vessels, and these cells are continuous the whole way through our body. So coming from the heart, through the arteries, through the capillaries, back through the veins, back to the heart again, just making that one smooth gliding surface the whole way through. Now, the middle layer of the arteries and the veins are called the tunica media. And in our arteries in particular, we have a very thick muscle layer there. And these muscles in our arteries and veins are comprised of smooth muscle. And this is involuntary muscle, so we don't have to think about it. It all changes automatically. And as this muscle constricts and dilates, it makes the lumen of the arteries, or the space in which blood can flow, either very small or very large. And then there's the heart. The heart's responsible for pumping blood and its components around the body and back again. So it carries the oxygen-rich blood to the tissues and helps transport the oxygen-poor blood back up to the heart and the lungs again. The heart lies behind the sternum, so 2/3 of it is directly behind the sternum, and 1/3 of it lies off to the left-hand side of the thoracic cavity. It's situated between the left and the right lung, and it's approximately the size of a closed fist, which is roughly and weighs roughly about 300 grams. But the size of the heart is very much dependent on age, gender, and body size. The heart is located within the chest, and it's anchored there and stays in that position by means of the pericardium. The other name for the pericardium is the pericardial sac. So this is a double layer membrane which surrounds and protects the heart, as well as providing the function of keeping it stable in its position. So this membrane is in contact with the heart itself. It doubles back upon itself and then anchors into other structures close by. Within the pericardial sac, there's the pericardial cavity, and this contains a small amount of serous fluid. This fluid helps prevent friction buildup while the heart's constantly beating in the thoracic cavity. So it provides not only protection, but also anchorage. So here's another good diagram that shows the pericardium up at the top here doubling back upon itself to form this pericardial cavity or pericardial space here. And as we go deeper into the layers of the heart wall, we'll see that there's actually 3 layers to the heart wall. There's the epicardium, which is the outer layer of the heart wall, the myocardium, which is this muscular layer within the heart wall, and the endocardium. And as I mentioned before, there's that epithelial layer running through the heart and all the blood vessels, and they're continuous with one another. So this endocardium actually has that epithelial layer running on the inside of it to make smooth flow of blood through the heart chambers and through the blood vessels. So as we go deeper into the anatomy of the heart, as I've mentioned before, the heart is a pump and it pumps blood around the body. But the heart is actually comprised of 2 pumps, so left-sided and a right-hand-sided pump. So the heart has 4 chambers in it, 2 atria at the very top and 2 ventricles at the bottom. So this would be the right atrium, the right ventricle, and that would be the left atrium and the left ventricle. The heart also has valves within it, and these one-way valves, just like the valves that are in the blood vessels, stop blood from flowing backwards. They ensure that blood flows in one direction through the heart. So we have atrioventricular valves, and this is just a valve that is situated between the atrium and the ventricle. That's why they get their name atrioventricular, because they lie between the atria and the ventricle. So we have one on the right-hand side and one on the left-hand side. The one on the right-hand side of the heart is called the tricuspid valve, and that's because it has 3 sides to the valve. The one on the left-hand side of the heart is called the bicuspid or mitral valve. So it's labeled the bicuspid valve because it actually only has 2 sides to its valve. Then leaving the ventricles, we have what's called a semilunar valve. So we have one in the pulmonary artery, and we also have one in the aorta leaving the left ventricle. And they're called semilunar valves just because of their shape and their structure. And these valves are just important to ensure that blood flows in the correct direction through the heart and that no blood flows backwards through the heart. So the heart not only has specialized muscle tissue in it called myocardium, but it's also got an electrical conduction system within the heart, which has the capability of generating electrical impulses and rapidly conducting these electrical impulses through the heart. And this is what provides the heart with its unique style of contraction and hence the effective pumping method of pumping blood around the heart. So right up at the top over here, we have what's called the sinoatrial node. So this is also called the pacemaker of the heart, and that's because it sets the rate in which the heart beats. It has the fastest discharge of electricity in the heart, so it can send out electrical impulses at a rate of between 60 to 100 beats per minute. And this can also increase or decrease with external stimulus. So if you're exercising, the SA node can just push more and more electrical impulses out to give you the heart rates of 120 or 140 that you might get when you're running really fast. But the same would happen as when you're actually resting and going to sleep. Hormones in your body are released to stimulate the SA node to beat slower and slower, because you don't need your heart to be beating at 100 or 120 when you're sleeping. It's more going to be sitting around the 50 to 60 mark. So the SA node generates the impulses in the heart, or it's the main site of impulse generation. And when the SA node discharges its electrical currents around the tops of the heart, the two atria end up contracting together, and that's what causes that first beat in the heart. When that contraction occurs, that's what helps to force the blood from the top chamber of the heart down into the ventricles. So once the top chambers of the heart, or the atriums, have contracted, the electrical impulse is then collected by the AV node over here. This AV node then slows the impulse down just slightly to give enough time for the atria to get the blood from the atrium to the ventricles, and then it very quickly transmits the impulse through the AV node bundle, or the bundle of His, down the right hand side and the left hand side bundle branches, all the way down to our Purkinje fibers right down at the bottom. It's a very curious name. And this rapid transmission of electrical impulse down through the ventricles results in the ventricular contraction that takes place. And that's the really big beat and really big force that pushes blood out of the heart to the lungs and around the body. So there's a number of important vessels to have a look at when studying the anatomy of the heart, and these are called the great vessels. So the first two is the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava. Now on the diagram over here, this is the top one over here, superior in your anatomical terminology means above, so the higher up or above vessel, and inferior is below, so that's your superior and your inferior vena cava. Now they're responsible for carrying deoxygenated blood, that's why those vessels are colored in that blue color, to the atrium over here on the right hand side of the heart. The pulmonary artery, this is the red vessel leaving the heart over here, going out. Now, this vessel is still carrying deoxygenated blood from this right-hand side of the heart. It's responsible for carrying this deoxygenated blood to the lungs. Now, arteries usually carry oxygenated blood, but this is the only artery in the body which carries deoxygenated blood, because it's taking the blood that's being collected from the body off to the lungs so that that carbon dioxide can be breathed out and the oxygen can be breathed in and the blood can become oxygenated. Now, this oxygenated blood returns to the heart via the pulmonary vein, and that's these two small little veins coming in the back end of the heart over here. Now, this vein is the only vein in the body, or should I say these veins are the only veins in the body that carry oxygenated blood. So veins usually carry deoxygenated blood, but this is the exception. And then there's the aorta. The aorta leaves the left ventricle and it's responsible for transporting high volumes of blood under high pressure to the head, right down to the fingertips and all the way down to the toes. So now that we've spoken quite a lot about the anatomy of the heart, we're going to have a look at the blood flow through the heart, and I'll use all of those terms that we've just learned about to describe how the blood flows through the heart. So blood returns to the heart through the veins, and which lead to the very, very big veins called the superior and the inferior vena cava. So the superior and inferior vena cava deposit the oxygen poor blood or deoxygenated blood into the right atrium. Once the blood is in the right atrium, the SA node will release its electrical impulse, and it causes the atria to both contract at the same time. When the atrium contracts, this will force the deoxygenated blood through the tricuspid valve, which is on the right-hand side. Once the blood now moves through the tricuspid valve, it'll enter into the right ventricle, just down over the bottom over here. And once blood has entered into that right ventricle, these valves will shut off to prevent backflow of blood through the heart. Once the electrical signal now is conducted down through the septum over here into the bottom parts of the ventricle, they will contract and they'll force blood up through this pulmonary valve or semilunar valve into the pulmonary arteries. The pulmonary arteries take blood off to the lungs, and this is where gaseous exchange will occur in the lungs, where carbon dioxide will move out and oxygen will move in down pressure gradients, and oxygenated blood will now return to the heart through the pulmonary veins. We can see the red veins colored in on the sides over here. This oxygenated blood now enters into the left atrium, and when the new cardiac cycle starts again, the left atrium and right atrium together will contract, and the oxygenated blood will now move through the left atrium, through the bicuspid valve, or what's known as the mitral valve, into the left ventricle. The left ventricle will then contract, forcing blood right out through that next semilunar valve, and because it's in the aorta, it's called the aortic semilunar valve, into the aorta and to the rest of the body. So while we have this slide up, it's a very good diagram to have a discussion about a few different things. So one of the first things I'd like to do is draw your attention to the size of each of the ventricles. So on the right hand side, we'll notice that the ventricle wall, or the muscle in the ventricle wall, is a lot thinner than on the left hand side. So the left hand side of the heart, or the left ventricle, has this very, very thick, well-established muscle there. Now the reason why the right hand side is smaller than the left hand side is the right hand side of the heart only has to pump blood a short distance. So it only needs to be able to get a strong enough contraction to maintain enough pressure to get the blood from the right side of the heart to the short distance of the lungs on left and right of the heart and back to the heart again. Whereas the left hand side of the heart has to pump blood the whole way up to the head, down to the fingertips and down to the toes, and it needs to do it with enough pressure to maintain good enough blood pressure and continuous flow of blood through the blood vessels. The heart will generally beat, well, the normal ranges are between 60 and 100 beats per minute for an adult, and with each beat the heart can pump out about 70 mils of blood. Now, this amount of blood is what's called the stroke volume. The stroke volume definition is the amount of blood that is pumped out of the heart with each ventricular contraction. So that's approximately 70 mils. So bearing in mind that the heart beats 60 to 100 beats per minute, within the space of 1 minute, your heart has the potential to pump through its entire blood volume. So that's quite a significant amount of work that your heart is doing minute by minute and on a daily basis. Now that we've had a look at blood flow through the heart and how it actually flows through the heart, it's important to describe that there are three major circuits of blood flowing from and to the heart. The first of these is the pulmonary circulation. So this is blood flowing from the right hand side of the heart over here to the lungs and back to the left hand side of the heart. So that's one circuit. The second circuit is peripheral circulation. So that's when blood leaves the left hand side of the heart, goes to the body's tissues and enters back to the right hand side of the heart. And the last of these is the coronary circulation. So this is the blood flow to the myocardium and back. Here's a diagram of that coronary circulation. So because the heart is a muscle that is highly important and it is working continuously day and night, it needs its own blood supply. So we have these two major arteries leaving the aorta, which is the right coronary artery and the left coronary artery. And these two major arteries supply the myocardium of the heart, the muscle of the heart, with the oxygen and nutrients it needs. And then the veins take away all that metabolic waste and carbon dioxide and return it back to the right atrium over here to be circulated to the lungs again. So that concludes our section on the cardiovascular system. If you do have any questions or any clarifications that need to be made, please don't hesitate to contact us. And the next topic we'll be discussing is the respiratory system.